Welcome, everyone. My name is Kimberly Bradley. I am the Conversations Curator here at Art Basel Miami Beach. Thank you for coming today to this talk, which will explore the practices of two textile artists who employ traditional crafts to create ambitious works of contemporary art. On stage today are New York-based artists Sagarika Sundaram in the center and Sarah Zapata to my far left, both of whose fiber-based practices push the boundaries of materiality and delve into themes such as identity, labor, and how humanity and the natural world are inextricably intertwined. Moderating this panel is Ghanaian-American curator and cultural critic Larry Ossei-Mensah, the founder of ARTNOIR, a nonprofit organization through which he amplifies the artistic and conceptual voices of creatives, curators, and communities of color through collaborations with some of today's most exciting artists. Art Basel would like to thank UBS not only for partnering with us for this talk, but also for its 30 years of unwavering support. UBS is the global lead partner of Art Basel and is a long-standing patron of the arts, having commissioned many artists for exhibitions at the fair's iterations around the globe. This year's UBS Lounge presentation includes a new commission by Sagarika, who has created her largest work to date, Released Form, an installation made from hand-dyed wool and silk. And in UBS Art Studio this year is Sarah's installation Upon the Divide of Vermilion, presented in collaboration with ARTNOIR. Both presentations highlight UBS's dedication to craft and creativity, and I personally can recommend, if you haven't seen them already, please go there immediately, because they're wonderful. We're thrilled and honored to have you with us. Let's give the speakers a big round of applause and enjoy the conversation.
Thank you. If any of you guys have ever participated in a panel that I've moderated or spoken on, you know I need energy. So how are you guys feeling today? It's not good enough. It's Saturday. How are you guys feeling today? It's almost Christmas. Good. Well, my name is Larry Ossei-Mensah. I am honored to be in conversation with Sagarika and Sarah. I want to thank you both for what both of your practices have taught me, not only as a curator, but as a person. And you know, we've had these many small chats about, you know, textile and fiber, and me even having to reprogram my relationship to the medium. So thank you to UBS for collaborating with us. Thank you, Art Basel. Thank you to my ARTNOIR family. Thank you guys for being here. We are the last conversation, I think, for the fair, so we're gonna close it out strong. By a show of hands, how many artists are here in the room? Curators? Collectors? Textile fiber lovers? Okay, we're talking to the right audience. So I want to start off with, which I think is a fundamental question: why fiber? Why textile? What is it about the medium? And I think that's important to stress. Through doing this project, for me, I've had to reprogram to look at fiber, textile as a medium, just like I would look at oil on canvas or clay. You know, many of you know I'm a ceramics junkie. So what about fiber, textile? How does it inspire your practice? How did you come to it? And what does it allow you to do creatively, the freedom and the opportunities that other mediums possibly don't offer? That's for anyone.
I'll start. I always loved, I think, exploiting like our relationship to textiles, and I very much like grew up with like an understanding of it. My father's from Peru, and there's obviously like a really important, rich history to textiles there, from a traditional standpoint, as well as my grandfather owned a fabric shop in the family hometown in Piura. But on the other side of my family, my mother is like very evangelical Christian. I was raised very much so in Texas. And there's biblical text that talks about how a woman is good, she works with her hands. And so textiles really became a way to sort of navigate being both of these identities, but also very much on my terms. And I think something that I think about often is like both and neither. And I think textiles are like a really important way to exist within that. We have an inherent relationship as humans to textiles. And so even before I think I understood what I was doing, it was more so just seeing what was available to me. And clothing, textiles were a way really to sort of access something that I thought was inaccessible.
For me, I'm from India. I live in New York, but I just grew up surrounded by or exposed to such a vast library of handmade textile, all these different strategies, hundreds of varieties of weaving and dyeing. And I came to what I make right now. I make a cloth called felt, and I make it by hand, and I hand dye the wool. In a way, it's kind of it's kind of surprising that I ended up at felt, because it's on the fringe of this kind of cultural textile culture in India. It's something that is practiced by farmers and nomadic communities. But for me, wool fiber, it's very alive. Has a lot of, it talks, when I wet the wool and rub it, and that's what makes the cloth. It's a very simple, old way of making cloth. In a way, it's more primitive, if you can still say that word, to weaving. And it's very plastic in the sense that I feel like I can make lots of shapes with it. In a way, it's like a language that I think in. And somebody showed me felt when I was, in my early 20s, a project that they made, someone in my university, my undergraduate degree in India. And I just was instinctively drawn to it, and I felt like I wanted to bite into it. I have no other way to explain it. It felt very sensorial and activated me. And it took me, some 10, 15 years to sort of actually learn how to make it, and then, develop a kind of handwriting and language within felt making that sort of has a grip on me. I think it's the plasticity and possibilities that it offers me are sort of endless. And that's where I am right now. Yeah.
And to piggyback that, because you give a little bit of context in terms of entry point, what was the first memory where you're like, I can make art with this? Because you talked about studying it in school. When we did our visit, you showed me a batik that you had from like 10th grade.
Yeah.
That you still travels with you.
Yeah.
So what is it about, either that memory or those moments that kind of like, you're like, okay, because we talked about how are we going to upend things, right? I'm not going to curse, but what I really want to say. But like, how can we F things up? So when was the first time you said, okay, I can make art from this. I can say something. I can hold space. I can recalibrate the conversation around like what is considered contemporary art.
I came from, a design background where sort of I think there's an audience that you're serving. And I think I was tired of that way of making. I wanted to make in a more open-ended way and think about an idea in a longer term, like, an idea that has a very kind of far trajectory and, almost an impossible idea that I then break down. And then I thought, wherever I land, it'll still be interesting. So the first moment I think I was in a sort of palette cleanser phase of my life and trying to really make in a way that I wasn't really concerned with who was around me or who was watching me, but just trying to really listen to the material. And the first thing I made was in my kitchen. And I took some wool. I learned how to make felt on a lady's kitchen table in London. It was a 3-hour workshop. And, she showed me how to make these beads. And so that was sort of rolls. But what I did was I took a little bit of a felt ball and covered it with another felt, like encased layers upon each other. And then I cut it with my kitchen knife. And that was an idea for a very large piece, and I made some drawings. It's an idea that is still to be realized, but I think that was the moment I felt like I like this way of making, something very small that actually has a really bigger kind of possibility and potential.
Beautiful. I don't know. I think so. I was always attracted to art when I was a kid. I was a weird little kid who was making paintings of rats, and eventually, one is still surviving. We'll show it one day. But really, I think I always hated being a kid. I hated that I had so little control over anything in my life. But once I started going to the thrift store when I was in 7th grade, that was huge. I started cutting up clothes and hot gluing them together, painting the cloth, really anything that I could really control. And I looked like the crazy little kid that I was. And I think it was really that sort of catalyst moment where I saw the potentiality of cloth. And after studying weaving in Texas, I really felt like weaving had become a part of my existence that I never knew that I needed. And it was really through weaving and understanding what that was that things really took a turn. And the first rug that I made was basically when I had just graduated school. I was fresh in New York, being a lesbian for the first time. It was a lot to deal with, what my life had been in Texas. And so to deal with that, I was writing lesbian foot erotica. And through that writing practice, I really understood what I wanted to make. Writing was a way to access fantasy in ways that I couldn't afford. And so really thinking about feet, they're a really important part of us as humans. They're what connect us to the earth, as well as our trajectory through life. Biblically, feet are a symbol of humility, and humility is something that I think is also really connected to textiles. But really thinking about that part of the body, that's what led me to start working with rugs and to think about rugs. Rugs are this really important object. In Peru and in many places in South America, textiles were not used on the ground prior to colonialization, but they're seen as this very specific object from this part of the world when really they're symbolic of political erasure and change. And so through rugs, they've really sort of migrated and become all-encompassing of the space. And I think that once I sort of got to rugs, that's when things clicked.
And you mentioned fantasy. How much of that writing directly or indirectly serves as a framework for the universe that you're creating? So we think about the presentation downstairs upon the Divide of Vermilion, and it is this, you have ruins, you have columns, you are coercing a particular choreography in terms of experiencing the installation or experiencing your world. So, does that experience in terms of writing, thinking about these imagined spaces, thinking about history, inform how you think about the practice, installations, and making work?
Absolutely. I think writing has become an imperative part to the work, especially thinking about installation. Ultimately, it's world building, and that's how I like to think about text as well. I think, again, that's a really beautiful way that humans have sort of been able to access things that they could not physically. And so really sort of shaping those narratives and how that ultimately visually shapes the space, I think is so important. And I think that also speaks to the incredible relationship between text and textile. The thing that I continue to go back to with pre-Columbian textiles is obviously they're some of the most incredible abstract works that were ever created, but ultimately they were documents. And I think that that is what I find the most inspiring about them.
And Sagarika release forms. I saw the picture. You showed me the maquette. I was like, this is cool. You showed me how it was constructed, and I physically saw it. And I'm like, what is going on in this person's mind? And you see images, I'll point to them when they come up on the screen. But you challenge viewers' perception of space blending the bodily with the botanical and the architectural. Can you talk about how you approach conceptualizing this work, but also how does that function as like a equation in how you approach the practice now?
I think, I live in New York, which is like, famously doesn't have a lot of space. So I'm trying to do more with less. And what that means is, what I like to do is when I have a certain space, when I can make a one piece of cloth, I work on tables. I like to break the surface of the cloth like this one and unfold it open to give me double the width, And this makes me think of a kind of weaving called double weave and making double cloth. It was a form of weaving where you can one pass and you can cut open and double the width or the length. And women who could weave this way were burnt at stake because they were considered this was magic. And I just think that's, it's just maths. So, it's just so silly. And I just like that approach of being resourceful. And I really like this piece, Released Form, which is at the UBS private lounge. So it's 32 feet, roughly. And it is made from one piece of cloth. But I made it as one panel that opened up into 3 parts. So this is the way I just like to break open the surface of the cloth and give myself more from whatever I have. I'm being resourceful. And yes, I think there's something also transgressive about cutting cloth, because when I cut it open, I spend all this time to make the fabric, and to cut it, feels like a crime. Mm-hmm. But there's also something very exciting about it. And I think it comes back to the idea of a bite, that sensorial sort of felt is very satisfying to cut, gives you a very clean cut. And that's what I'm doing right now. I'm kind of in this world of discovering, working with the fold. And the fold is a fact in my practice. You see lots of openings. So these are the 3 panels that opened up. And the work was, I planned the work to be installed in different ways. So it hinges together and can even compress and get very small. It has these 2 openings on the side that are kind of secrets in the work. So I'm interested in shape-shifting and, making multiple. This is another kind of cut that opens up and wire goes through to kind of hold it up from gravity. So that's where I am. But all of the associations that come with a fold or an opening or a portal, all of that is like, for me, I love to hear how people respond to the work, because that's what imbues the work with meaning for me. It's the sum of everybody's associations. That's why I like abstract work, because, it's really fun to engage with something that I made with somebody else and say, okay, they asked me, what does it mean? And I said, no, you tell me what comes to your mind. Somebody who was serving lunch today was like, what's the meaning? I was like, what do you think? She says, very vibrant. I said, yeah, that's, let's go some more. So it's kind of a conversation. Yeah.
I want to talk about dyeing really quickly. Hand dyeing. Not that. You talk about it, you say dyeing is like cooking. Can you elaborate on what that means? How many people know what hand dyeing is? By show of hands. Okay. So you got a bunch of cooks in the room.
I compare it artistically to glazing, like in ceramics, because there's chemistry involved, but I call it kitchen chemistry because, you are with dyeing, my dye process, whether it's natural dyes or acid dyes, you're dealing with temperature and pH. So I use citric acid to get to a certain kind of pH in the bath. And, I'm very precise. People say, oh, your bathroom where I do my dyeing at home must be all really colorful. I said, no, it's very clean. You have to keep notes and record. Like I say, a good dyer is not somebody who makes color. It's somebody who can make the same color twice. So I think there's a part of the dyeing process, hand dyeing process, where you are following a recipe, but then you also kind of go off the recipe and kind of are responding to, okay, I made this color, can I push it into a yellowy green or to a bluish green? And so you're really kind of artistically kind of playing with it. And in a way, it's like a cook, when I love to cook, and it's like the way I dye. It's like, picking things from a shelf and say, okay, let's see what I can make with it. And I work with all these different kinds of wool from different parts of the world, like the lower Himalayas, Catskills, and Oaxaca. And the base color of the wool often is gray or brown. And I love to use that as a starting point to build flavor or color. And I think that part of the process is kind of what activates me when I make the work. When I make it really beautiful, I say, oh, I really want to use that, It's like going to a farmer's market and like buying beautiful produce. So I'm making all these like lovely starting points for myself that then get, put into the work, find relationships between color. And I think my approach to color is really, I'm finding patterns but breaking them. I think what I see in my work is a lot of movement. And so I think I use color. So for me, it has to vibrate and create a kind of generate some sort of energy. And then, I feel like, oh, I'm in a good place. But I also feel like, nature has no rules with color. You find all sorts of colors, including neon colors, like underneath the ocean with like sea creatures. So I feel like, why should I have rules? I kind of very promiscuous with color, yeah.
Tell a T. You mentioned, this is for both of you, going off recipe, breaking things, the breaking point. And you don't have to be kind of precise, but how much of the practice is, you have an idea, but then the material does something else that you didn't predict, and then you kind of follow that instinct. How much of it is going off recipe and using intuition, balanced with a kind of more technical proficiency, I guess? Or how do you navigate that?
I think for me, I'm very much like a Capricorn through and through. And so I like plan, I like structure. And so the installations, like everything is very much set and designed and planned. But then improvisation, I think, is really what happens when the pieces are being made. And so a way that I really use color is really choosing something that's beautiful and something that's ugly and putting it next to each other. And I think that's when the magic and the failure occurs. And that's when I guess I'm off book, is seeing really what happens. And similarly to Sagarika, I too am working in a smaller space and like hoping everything works out. But that's also, I think, speaks to the beauty of textiles, is the magic that can occur when you're making something flat and then you get it into the space and suddenly it takes shape and it becomes something that even I feel like we can't control.
Yeah, there's something unruly about and wild about the cloth wants to be its own thing. It's like it's a body that wants to take space in its own way, and it has to hang with grace. It has to, for me, textiles has a very high, steep learning curve. There's it's like ceramics. You have to understand the medium. You can do things that are, sort of experiments, but I really love seeing rigor in textiles, and I really love seeing somebody who really understands construction, because there are all these ways to make cloth. And when I see artwork that uses that as a base understanding to jump off from, then I'm like, oh, okay, there's something going on there. But so, I have a deep understanding of how to make felted cloth. And for me, it's like, but when I'm mixing color, and based on that gives me the freedom actually to play. Mm-hmm. And, that's kind of my work is about. At the heart of my work it's about unself-consciousness. It's like I can't try to be free, but I hope I can be in a state of freedom when I'm making the work. And when I finish the work, because I make them backwards, I build the face down and then build the body up to the back and then roll it with water and soap and compress it. So I only really know what it looks like when it's hanging up, and the folds are either kind of falling with gravity or there's wires sewn in and kind of it's hanging again. So it takes me a while to understand what the work actually is. That keeps me kind of, it's very exciting to make the work. And I can really tell in the final result whether I sense that freedom has carried through the making.
So we have this word, craft, crafted, crafting. When I think about crafted, something that's made with intention, with thought, with intuition, crafting, working towards mastery. But the word craft and its association with cloth or ceramics. How do you think about this notion of craft within your practice? Is it a word you don't think about? Is it good, bad? Like, how does it factor in how you think about being a contemporary artist, being an artist today?
For me, it comes back to rigor. I mean, even a film is crafted. You know, all works of art are crafted. And no matter the medium, I think that when something is refined and ripened, you see the craft in the thing, you know. You can experience it. And you kind of experience the whole, like rather than, I mean, it's like watching an actor. If you watch an actor and believe the story, that's when your craft is in play. You know, it's like, you're not like, oh, they're such a good actor. If you can see that, then I think they're not a good actor, actually. It's kind of like when you drink a glass of wine, you're not looking at the glass, but you're kind of enjoying the wine. But the glass is very important to enjoy the wine or to experience it. So I think craft has a very important, it's like the receptacle that holds it. But for me, craft has a notion of perfection to it. But I think for me, where it gets really interesting is when things are imperfect and there's, you know, things that were supposed to be connected, there's a hole between them, or there's separations, and that surprised me. That's when it gets really interesting and moves, the imperfection moves it into a place of, you know, it gives the work character and moves it into art.
Yeah, I agree. I think imperfection is really beautiful and important. And I think really the only thing that I don't like about craft is that technical perfection is the currency. I think that that's very important. I want to echo what you said about textiles take so much rigor and understanding, but it's how to really take that further and to subvert that. And so there's so many, I think, incredible triumphs with craft and how to be unapologetic to that history and to speak to sometimes that ridiculousness that exists, but also that intelligence that exists. I think that one of the most beautiful things that I love about craft is the intelligence that's expressed through hands and body. And I think that that's a really important tradition that we have to maintain as humans. But how can we also exist within it on our own terms? And so I think for me, it's like I like to think about how I can work within this tradition of craft and be unapologetic about it, but also take it to somewhere else and have that sort of like existence exist on its own terms. And so it's rather than being sort of like small and diminutive, like with women's work, I think it's important to take up space as much as possible.
Can you expand on that? Because you talk a lot about, I mean, you can see here, wanting the work to be loud, to be colorful, to be vibrant. And maybe we can talk about it in the context of the presentation downstairs. Why is that an essential part to how you approach your practice?
Yeah, I think that ultimately, like, I want culture to be for everyone. I think there's this idea, particularly in the US, that culture is for the elite and art is for everyone. And so, yes, like, how can we make that as accessible as possible? And textiles is a really important way to access people. There's a very ravenous hunger that people have with textiles. And I love subverting that, where they're not supposed to touch the work, but I know that they're touching the work all the time. But color also is like a really beautiful way for that to exist, as well as architecture. I think that often, just like you were saying with the wine glass, like so often we're in spaces and we're not looking at what's dictating how we're existing in it. And so very much like textiles, I think those both are these sort of like unseen, very visible presences. And so what does that look like when they're combined? And so color, I think, is a way, obviously, to articulate the installations, but ultimately it's because I want the viewer to activate the work. I want the viewer to see themselves in the work. And I think with color, people have like an immediate attraction to that. So with Red, obviously, which is the show that's downstairs for Upon the Divide of Vermilion, I wanted it to be very much about red and how that speaks to my newfound interest in geology. I was so fortunate to be in Miami at Fountainhead in September, sort of like researching what this installation was going to be. And
this is a photo of it right here.
Yes, so vermilion is basically this like very specific mineral compound, and so it's not soluble in water. And so I wanted to think about how this color sort of speaks to resilience, and also how geology ultimately is world building, and how that speaks to basically what's shaping around us, and this idea of destruction and reconstruction and this layering of time. So the red, I think, certainly was a very poetic nod to that, but then also what we accept as red, with colors that obviously are derivatives of other ones. There's sort of that unseen base that's there. So like with purple and with orange, there's red that exists within it. And so how that again speaks to this layering of time.
Fearlessness. Creating involves experimentation, failure, reinterpretation. You talked a little bit about this unconscious freedom. How do you embrace the unknown and then lean into, the potential risks that are involved in creating this work? Because I think a lot of times in life, you have a lot of unknowns. And I think that's what I admire about artists, is that you're just willing to kind of go for it. But how do you, in those moments, trust your gut and not overthink it when you're creating something?
It's very scary when I make the work. When I cut the work, I only have one shot. And if I cut in the wrong spot, then all the layers that I've made along the way are kind of not going to do their thing. So, but I think it is a practice, of the more cycles you do it. I mean, really the incentive is to see what's inside when I cut the thing. And that's very exciting. So it's like, being a little kid and waiting for a present and opening it up. That feeling, I think I'm addicted to it. And I kind of, as I build the work, I'm putting surprises and Easter eggs in there for myself that I then open up. So it's very exciting to make the work. It's also scary because I don't really know how those parts are going to relate to each other. But I think this is why I chose to be an artist, because risk is, at the end of the day, I mean, it's a creative risk, it's like, I don't know, it's if I looked at my life and I thought, okay, let's see. I mean, I come from like a middle-class background. I thought, what's the worst that could happen to me? I'd move back to India. I'd have a very modest life. I'd still make art. And I thought, that's not so bad. So then what else can I do? That's, So I decided to kind of throw the gauntlet down and just really challenge myself. And I do like to make these ambitious works because I think life's short. I want to see what I can do, and I'm kind of on this journey now where I feel like I'm sort of, sometimes I feel like a frog in a blender, and sometimes I feel like...
What is that?
So just chaotic, So just spinning around because all of this work is so complicated to make. But then sometimes I feel like I like to say I feel like I'm surfing on a rainbow. It's very exciting. It's very joyful. So the risk, it's kind of like on the edge, and I think it's exciting.
Yeah, I think failure is important. I think that once you kind of like accept that failure is part of the process, then like truly the world is your oyster, because then the stakes, like, they're so high that they're not there anymore, which I think is so important. And ultimately, I said this one during install, but often I feel like I'm in a cage of my own making, where like I make so many rules for myself. The work has to be this particular way, and sometimes those rules are really important, and sometimes those rules just have to be forgotten about. And so yeah, I think that's. I don't know if that answers your question. I already forgot the question, but but I think failure is very, very important.
So we're here at Art Basel, Miami Beach, 2024. A lot of people here today. In your observation, watching people engage the work, because you make it, it's intuitive, it comes from you, it goes out into the world. You can't necessarily dictate how people will engage and respond, but what have you found interesting in just watching people, touch it even though they're not supposed to touch the work? Endless amount of selfies.
Yeah.
But feel connected. Even like we've been doing these pom-pom making workshops for the last 3 days, and like one of my buddies came and he's like, tough. He's like, man, I'm not making no pom-poms. And then he starts looking at the yarn and he sees this like bright red, and then he touches it and it's like kryptonite. Next thing you know, he made 5 pom-poms. So what has it been like? What is it to see your work, this ambitious work in the world, here in Miami, and then a public that you have some that are just, we call them pom-pom curious, right? Just curious about art and the experience. What has it been like?
Yeah, I mean, I have to be honest, it's been incredible and such an honor. And thank you again, Larry, for working on this project with me, and also Sagarika and UBS and everyone. But no, it's just been really amazing. I think that people have responded so well. Like the colors, I think immediately were drawing people in. And many people have said that it's been almost like a reprieve, not only from the intensity of the fair, but also just what's going on. Things are obviously very complicated right now, and so even if there's just a little bit of time for relief, I think that is immensely powerful, as well as the importance of having fun. And again, a low stakes environment where you're just able to work with your hands, you're able to have a little bit more of an understanding of a material that you interact with all the time, and what that really can do to set your mind free to think about other things. So I think certainly the engagement has been amazing, and I hope that the ripple effects are far and wide. Yeah.
It's, my work released form has been in the private part of the UBS Lounge. So it's kind of viewable to a certain audience. But it's been wonderful. I have been loving kind of walking people around the work and kind of telling them the story of the work, opening up things. And the same feeling that I get when I make the cut and fine incisors is like, I find them also, and that's really rewarding for me when, we can all feel that feeling together and hear those sounds. I mean, really kind of why I titled the work Released Form is because I'm thinking about release as an idea and laughter as a form of release, and asking the question, where in the body does laughter come from? And it comes from this deep, deep place that's kind of unknowable. And that's where I make the work from. That's where I operate from. And very intuitive, very instinctive, and kind of involuntary. And I think people really kind of, they walk up and they just want to touch and they want to be surrounded. And in the way that I think I make the work, in a way that I also want to be immersed and surrounded by these kind of big swathes of fabric.
But what is it about textile that compels you to want to have a human connection to it? One, obviously we wear it every day, right? But like, it's very unlikely and rare that I want to touch a painting, right? But you are making sculpture with textile. You are making paintings with wool, what in your observation makes people want to take that bite, touch it? Like, it's funny, I was actually talking to a curator, I think 2 days ago, and they're like talking to me, and then their hand does this, and like, oh shit, I'm not supposed to touch the art. And so, but for me, that was such a beautiful moment that, like, with all these rules that we have, just like you talk about that freedom to just kind of like be. You know, is it something specific to textile that you find that allows you to just be as an artist? You talk about this idea of being a witness to the creative process. Is that something you found with the material, the medium?
I mean, I think that, so I've made works, like hanging works, where there's kind of a doorway and the invitation is for the viewer that has a slit through it to walk through it. And in art is so sort of, touching is forbidden. But I still want to kind of offer an invitation to people to be touched by the work if they choose to walk through it. I mean, just physically, textile just has a tactile register. It's furry, or it's kind of, it directly, it's the eyes, but it's also touch. It's also taste, I think, It's multisensorial. It's, and it's kind of this very early kind of, for me, like, there's a saying in India, which is kind of a political slogan called roti, kapda, makan. So the three things you need are roti, which is bread, kapda, cloth, and makan is a home. So for me, like, textiles is like, early humans were making homes, they were growing food, and they were making cloth to clothe and protect themselves. So very primal. I mean, painting is also very primal, expressing. So I think there's this, it's so old. I think it connects us back to our early ancestors, and it's beyond language, and it pulls us towards it in a way I don't think we can even verbalize or explain.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's primordial for sure. And I think that almost like it's the same sort of sensation when you see an animal, you must touch the animal. I think something about softness sort of like signifies friend, it signifies companion. And so when you see something that's like human sized or animal sized, there's like this innate sort of like understanding that like, I must touch this. I am now acquainted with this. And I liken it to our human attraction to glitter, speaking to our desire and need to find water. There's like these things that are just in us, and we at times cannot control it with these objects.
So last question, and then we'll take 3 questions from the audience. There's a lot of textile in the fair. You both have made me converts. I was in Sarah's studio learning how to weave, making pom-poms. How do you think about your practice moving forward in terms of continuing to preach the gospel of textile as a medium? And it's not just tapestry, right? It is something that invites a rigorous discourse around identity, around geography, around thinking about nature. What are things, I guess, takeaways that you now, go back to the studio with new inspiration after you had some time to rest, and then informs kind of the next phase of this for you?
Yeah, I mean, it was certainly a really exciting thing to see so many textiles at the fair this year. And my hope is that, people aren't like, wow, there's so many paintings this year. So imagine if that's sort of what it evolves into, where it's just a really important, accepted work medium as it is. Just as like people have always been making work with textiles, just because people feel they discovered it doesn't mean it's new. And so I think that that's really the most inspiring for sure, and how to continue to talk about it. I think that even our work looks so different. Our methodology is so different. And I think that speaks to the vastness that exists within the medium and the unlimited potentiality that exists within it. So for me, it's about talking about the work. It's about teaching and getting the kids to not be scared of yarn, because people are scared of yarn. They're scared to cut it. And so to really awaken that innate knowledge that I hope exists forever.
I think my entry point is abstraction. And abstraction, the history of abstraction so lives in the world of painting and sculpture. And whereas I'm really interested in, and it's so, the kind of post-war history and in the West. And what I'm really interested in is abstraction beyond this context and in other disciplines. So I've been looking at, abstraction in poetry and medieval Indian poetry. So 3,000 years old kind of poetry where there's, abstract thought that I can see, or even contemporary dance from the 60s in India. So artists working in abstraction, but outside of this post-war context in the West. So I've been looking at, architecture is always a big source of inspiration. And I love looking at, I'm reading a book right now which is called The Sufi Influence on Persian Islamic Architecture. And just so thinking of domes and gateways and all of these things as sculptural sort of gestures. So these are kind of my entry points into, I don't really personally care whether it's textile or not. I'm just working in this thing and pulling from all these different places because I'm curious and interested in those. I'm looking at music, traditional, music, classical music from South India, where I'm from, but also kind of jazz, contemporary jazz, and just thinking, looking for evidence, ways in which, humans have thought in abstract ways, in abstraction for, that's again a way of thinking. And in a way, textiles is also a way of thinking. It's something that exists all over the world separately but simultaneously. So I guess I'm pulling from, this question is kind of, to me, taking me in all these different very interesting places. And, they show up in the work. Like I said, like I said to you earlier, I'm a witness. I'm kind of see what shows up in the work, something I've read some way, or encountered or spoken about to a friend. I'm like, oh, okay, it's here in the work. That means it means something, and that leads to the next thing. So I think that's the way forward for me.
Cool. So we'll take 3 questions. You were quick up there. I like that, this gentleman. And a question. I do not want a soliloquy. I don't want your Tinder profile. We want a question.
First, it's female, so not Jim. I just have a hat on. But I have a bunch of questions in my head. It's like,
Can you say your name?
I'll stand up. My name is Pasha Cook.
Yeah.
Visiting from Houston. So I believe that everything carries energy. And when you're talking about these textiles, is there a process or an emotion or something that you go through before you actually start the process of it, like this mood? And then also, do you see any kind of witnessing of, like, say, for instance, you had a mood with a specific textile or something that you created, and how people engage with it? Like, do you see any kind of patterns there? Because I believe, and then also I feel like it's like a spiritual thing that you have to kind of, it's a spiritual process. So is there any kind of process that you go through? Do you make sure that you're in a certain mood, and within that mood, and you're seeing people interact with it, do you see any kind of patterns with that, with people engaging with the art? Make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
I tend to cook as a warm-up, it just gets me in the flow. And often I don't even get to do that because I'm just rushing to make the work because I have a deadline. But I find that, when I'm happy and, I have time, then kind of quickly picking things up and making something quick and flavorsome, sort of, that's kind of what I'm doing, I love to watch the Great British Bake Off. But no, in terms of what energy the work is charged with, I think it's just I can't even describe it. It's just something in me, and then it comes out. But I do see that the work is in between this place of beautiful but also scary, slightly sort of formidable. And I think it does reflect that part of nature, because we think of nature sometimes in these idealized ways, but I do think that nature, and even human nature, there are parts of us that are frightening, even to our own selves. And I think the work feels like a mirror to my most secret self, in a way that a mirror doesn't even really reflect, an actual mirror doesn't. So the work is an even more truthful reflection of my soul. And I think people resonate, maybe, I hope, I guess, that's up to them really. But there is an energy and an energetic charge, I think, to the work that it's like, I like when the work talks to me at the end. It feels like it has a voice and a character, and it is saying something to me. That's when I feel like it's successful. There's some rocks, like sometimes in India, there are rocks on the side of the road, and parts of all sorts of, in Asia and Africa too, like people will suddenly decide that it has an energy, and they'll make markings on it, and they'll put offerings around it. And I think, when artwork attracts that kind of energy between the viewer and the work, I think there's something happening there that's, that it creates a space, a charged space that is good.
Yeah, I think for me, the work always begins with reading. I think research is a really important tool for me, and usually it's to seemingly disparate ideas. I'm always sort of attracted to anything that disproves biblical time, and I think that's why I'm deep in geology right now. But then very much pragmatically, I'm always listening to my music. I usually make a playlist. I have to feel like I'm having an amazing time, because otherwise your hands are always working, and if you have something going on, you just are like a hamster on a wheel, just going over personal problems. So I always like to really try and create an environment where I'm having fun, especially just because I'm alone a lot. I think ultimately it's not talked about, but it's lonely being an artist at times, because you're just working and really just you're with the material sometimes more than you're with people. So I think that energy is always imbued. I think the thing that I'm always trying to really think about with the work is honor and humility. I feel like they're sort of two branches of the same tree, and really how that speaks to the material and to the techniques. But so that's always very much imbued within the work. And then the patterns that I witness with people, I mean, now that the work has become so big, people just have, again, a tenacity. I feel like you can sort of see it on their face when they encounter the work. And I think that seeing that rhythm has been really beautiful. Or people are what is this? This is a ridiculous shag work, which I also think is important as well. I know it's ridiculous, but where does that take you?
Another question right here. And please give your name before you ask the question.
Sure. Hi, I'm Zena Edwards.
Hi, Zena.
Here from Bermuda. First of all, thank you for this. Sagarika, I gotta tell you, when I see that slash through your art, it feels so raw. And it feels like almost a wound is being shown. And I wonder, how that connects to what you're doing and how you feel about it. And for you, Ms. Zapata, I have to make a confession. I did fondle your shag.
Not fondle. I love
Sorry
it.
about that. Okay. That's it.
Thank you for your
Thank
honesty.
you. I love it. Thank you.
I like that image of the wound. Oftentimes what's inside is very red. So I think, but again, I think it's it's the sum of everybody's associations that make the work what it is. There is something, cutting a scar, kind of opening. I think these are, but the fold is a fact, and everything else that you associate around it all these ideas. It's like a word cloud that kind of makes the work what it is. So I also feel very raw when I look at it and also cut it and it's hanging up there. I feel very vulnerable. It's like about the inside and outside, you know, that kind of space and the tension between the two. So I think the only thing there is for us to do is to watch that feeling and consider that the art brings us there.
I think with that, you got any more? One more. Last question. I told them I was going to start on time. One more over here. That's it. Quick question, and then, because they're going to get mad at me.
Hi, thank you. My name is Mabrak Tadag. Thanks, Larry, for this great talk. I'm wondering, speaking of craft and identity, how do you reconcile being women and doing great work, but also potentially being typecast as doing work that's sort of somewhat traditionally been domesticated and feminine? I'm just curious to see what you think of that. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I think when I was first starting out, I was very nervous about that just because, I had some crusted and busted studio visits where they were just like men who didn't get it. And like, I could just see them like, you're like, really talk about being vulnerable. Like you're trying to like tell them about your work and they're just like rolling their eyes, like not caring. And I think eventually I just got to a point where like, if you get it, you're my person. If you don't, bye. I think that like that confidence sort of like came eventually because everything is not for everyone. But the important thing I think for me is like how to make the work that I authentically want to make. And I think people are attracted to authenticity. And so it's really about, I think, having that confidence for me.
There is the part of textiles in pre-industrial societies that is almost not even valued in the supply chain is usually the part that's done by the woman. But the moment you make money from it, men do it. So in India, men are the weavers. And I don't know. I think a lot of people tell me that my work looks like female body parts. So like,
But how do you respond to that?
we just witness it, so sometimes I've had groups of men who come to the gallery and boys who are like, oh my God, I think it's okay, it's good, to kind of threaten them a little bit. Just, it's okay. It is, I think I feel very lucky to be working as an artist in this time because it's so much better now than it has ever been before. And there are so many women artists who've struggled so much, and galleries and collectors who've done a lot of work to make their work seen now. And I do feel like I'm standing on the shoulders of giants, and I feel very grateful. I don't take it for granted. People who worked in abstraction and were painters and were continually insulted about their work. I mean, that's really not the case anymore. So I feel lucky.
Absolutely.
With that, Sagarika, thank you. Sarah, thank you. Thank y'all for being here.